Good evening, all. Thank you so much for joining us. Welcome to the Candidates Forum for Brooklyn Borough President, Parks, Public Lands, and Land Use. I'm Jessica Saab, Advocacy and Communications Project Manager at New Yorkers for Parks, and we're proud to be one of the co-sponsoring organizations for this important discussion in Brooklyn tonight. New Yorkers for Parks has been advocating for better parks and building coalitions since 1908. Our parks are essential spaces and they need leadership, vision, and investment, especially in light of COVID-19. A few years ago, we helped powerful parks advocates in Brooklyn become a full-fledged group. It's my great honor to introduce the Brooklyn Parks and Open Spaces Coalition Chair, Marlene Panton.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Jessica. Thank you for the introduction and welcome to every one of you. We are happy to have you tonight. And I want to say a special welcome to the Borough President candidates. Thank you so much for joining us as well. So happy Earth Day to everyone. It's a wonderful time to talk about the importance of parks and open spaces and how critical they are to our borough and our communities. I want to mention that one of the reasons we want to have this discussion is because there continues to be an underinvestment in parks. We know that the Parks Department gets less than 1% of the city budget. And I think last year during the pandemic was a reminder of how critical parks are to our lives and how we need to invest not only in capital projects, but in staff as well. Last year we had so many people using the parks, a little staff because we've cut staff so much, and we saw the effects in our parks. And we also saw, I have to mention, the importance of volunteers. We come out and we take care of our parks. During the pandemic, we were not there. So we want to remind everyone that volunteering is important, but all the work that we do is just as important, and investing in our parks is even more critical. I want to thank our sponsors, our co-sponsors. So in addition to New Yorkers for Parks, we have a bunch of co-sponsors who joined in with us to make this possible. North Brooklyn Parks Alliance, North Brooklyn Neighbors, Prospect Park Alliance, Gowanus Canal Conservancy, Fort Greene Conservancy, Red Hook Conservancy. I hope I'm not forgetting anyone. Please forgive me if I am. And then I just want to thank Nadine Shelton, who is managing this production, because she's just done an amazing job. And lastly, if you want to know more about Brooklyn Parks and Open Space Coalition, please go to bkpoc.org to learn more about us. So now I will pass it on to our moderator, Brian Vines, who is a true Brooklynite and is also a community journalist. Brian, take it away.
All right, thank you. Speaking of true Brooklynites, we have at least 4 of them who are sharing the screen with me right now. These are the people who are our neighbors who would soon serve as borough president for the glorious borough of Brooklyn. So the way that things are going to work tonight is we've split the candidate pool into 2 halves. And we're going to spend about a half hour each with these 4 candidates, and then we'll spend the latter half hour with 4 other candidates. Now, in the interest of everyone getting their thoughts out clearly and coherently, we are going to make sure that we keep the timing tight while still monitoring for your questions. If there's something that rises to the level of asking our candidates who are in the room as it fits into our time constraints. But I urge and implore all of you to engage with our sponsors this evening and go to their websites to find out more information about where each of the candidates stand on the issues that we're going to be discussing tonight. But this is the most I'm going to talk all evening. I promise you we're going to devote more time to the candidates. And in the interest of that, they've each agreed to give a 30-second introduction of themselves. And I'm going to ask, as I see, well, that his microphone is open. I'll start with candidate Reynoso. Please give us your 30-second intro to the folks in the room.
Hi. I'm Councilmember Antonio Reynoso, running for borough president. I'm a son of immigrants that came here when they were extremely poor, food stamps, Section 8, welfare. If it was a government assistance program that existed, my family had to take advantage of it just to have me stand before you as a council member and a candidate for Brooklyn Borough President. I know what good government can do for people in need, and I want to make sure that I can pay that forward. So I'm ready to represent the greatest borough in the world, in the center of the universe, that is Brooklyn.
And he did it in record time, beating the 30-second cap. I'm going to see if we are as successful with candidate Whitehead.
Good evening, everyone. How are you doing? My name is Bishop Lamar Miller Whitehead, and I'm running to be, and I will be your next Brooklyn Borough President. I am the son of Arthur Miller. He was slayed by the NYPD officers in 1978, beat, choked to death, strangled to death, just like George Floyd, Eric Gardner, and I am his son. I'm running for the Brooklyn Borough President, so therefore I can be a prominent figure of Brooklyn, a voice for the voiceless. And when we talk about environmental, we must look at the Brownsvilles, the East New Yorks, and the Crown Heights, the young men, Black and brown young men and women that have environmental health with diabetes and hypertension and all the things that's been killing our community. So with that same ideology, I want to protect our environment, I want to protect our parks, and I want Brooklyn to be the best we can be. Thank you.
All right, you took a little bit of that time that candidate Reynoso left on the floor, but just know that I'm going to be monitoring time, and I trust that candidate Okana now, as she unmutes herself, will keep to that 30-second intro, and we're happy to have you. Please introduce yourself.
Thank you for having me. Good evening and happy Earth Day, everyone. My name is Trisha Okana. I am a community and housing educator and strategist. I'm a mother of 3. I am an entrepreneur. I'm the executive director of a nonprofit organization. I'm the former chair of housing for Community Board 17, former member of the Land Use Committee, the Youth Committee, and the Block Association Committee. And I'm one of the youngest people who joined the Community Board and was appointed. I am so happy to be here because this issue is very, very important. New York of Parks and Brooklyn Parks and Open Spaces. I take my children to the park all the time. I exercise in the park, so I see the issues. My administration, the Transportation, Public Service, and Infrastructure Advisory Council has already put together our master plan for Borough Hall when we get in there of how we're going to work with the New York of Parks. Adam Ganser has done a great job with the Play Fair Now Coalition, you know, and I really want to be a part of it. Refund Parks Fund. I want to sit at their tables and I want them to be part of our advisory council.
All right, that's your 30.
Thank
you so much. And finally, for this round, candidate Cornegie.
Thank you. I'm Councilmember Robert E. Cornegie Jr., the son of the late Reverend Dr. Robert E. Cornegie Sr., father of 6. I chair the Committee on Housing and Buildings, and in the last legislative session, I chaired the Committee on Small Business. I'm here to make sure that I have the narrative be done away that Black communities do not care about environmental justice, and that green spaces are not a luxury, they're a necessity.
All right, thank you for that introduction. And I will let you know, as you all see, that we have an ASL interpreter who is in the room for us, and we're just going to be conscious of her skills and make sure that we pace things to make sure that everyone gets the fullness of this experience.
Wait, so you want us to hurry up and slow down then?
What he said. So in the interest of Earth Day and just what candidate Cornegie finished with, everyone in New York City is really a parks patron. So I'm going to ask each of you to consider the question, what park or open space have you personally championed? And why is that project, park, or initiative meaningful to you? Like if we meet each other and say who we are as people by, hey, what high school did you go to? If I met you on the street, candidate Reynoso, and said, what's your park? What's your issue? How would you give me a minute 30 on that?
So my park, I would say, is Rodney Park. First, I want to say that my district has the 3rd least amount of park space in all of the city of New York. I went into the city council to be a council member that can fight for environmental justice. The only park space we have in the south side of Williamsburg comes on either side of the BQE. So because Robert Moses decided to split our community in half. And when the kids decide that they want to play, they got to suck in the fumes of these vehicles. But Rodney Park is a very important park to us. At one point, it was the center of gang violence in our district, and has been converted into an open space that has really made the district more vibrant and really speaks to the evolution of our community in a positive way. We still have these young people that get to play in these parks and use this space in a meaningful way. But Rodney Park has no green space. It is only blacktop, which 90% of our community community parks are blacktop, and we need to change that. And I'm looking forward to revitalizing many of our parks in Brooklyn and making it so that we can all enjoy green space and environmental justice, so we can lower asthma rates and take care of our health come the 22nd of June.
And not a moment before, I suspect, but I'm looking at you right now, candidate Whitehead. What's your park and what's the issue that you've championed there?
Oh, that's such a great question. My park will be Borough Park, the park where I was raised and played basketball, and also the park that they were supposed to change into the Arthur Miller Park because of what my father's done in the community. It would be the park where I went to PS 289, my elementary school, and I understood how to play basketball. Now it's plagued with gang members and it's forgotten. It's plagued with violence. It's plagued with a lot of territories where therefore we can build and create technologies within that park. We have the Children's Museum on one end on St. Mark's and Brooklyn. However, once you go to the other end, it's plagued with gang violence and it's plagued with fights on the basketball court, and it's forgotten. I want to remember these places. I want to be able to bring an environmental piece into our streets, into our communities, into what they call the hood. And I want to be the bold president for the people. I want to be the voice for the voiceless. I want to make sure that technology and the environment in parks across Brooklyn are not systemic racism attached to it. There's too much systemic racism through our park systems. There are good parks in Park Slope, but there are bad parks in Brownsville. And I want to make the playing field better and equal.
So just to be clear, we got your park, but your number one issue of concern that you worked on is bringing systemic equity to parks.
Yes.
Got it.
Yes, thank you.
Candidate O'Connor, unmute and tell us your park and what you've done to project meaningful change there.
So one of the parks that's very close to me is Canarsie Pier Park. My father is a fisherman, and he goes to that park a lot. You know, him and the guys, they can't wait until the water gets warm enough so they can go out there and fish. There are many times that I've gone there and fished with him as well. Hurricane Sandy did a big number over there. So that is something that my advisory council is looking into, just making sure that is sustainable going forward because of what has happened there. Also opening up the greenery for and the play park for the kids. I always have my kids when I'm going to that park. I've been going to that park since I've been a teenager, and letting parks be accessible to people, right? So as my parents are senior citizens, they shouldn't have to walk further than 10 blocks to get to a park. And when they get to a park, and when my kids get to a park, the park should be clean. So I know during COVID time, you know, that's when I spend a lot of my time in the parks, because, you know, we're in the house and the kids want to come out. And, you know, living in Brooklyn, you know, we don't have access to parks, especially in the Black and Brown communities, in the lower income communities, the communities that were hit harder with COVID. We need to get out. So getting out there, it would have been good to see more people cleaning the parks. But I do understand that there was a budget cut. There was a hiring freeze. About 1,700 people lost their jobs in the Parks Department. And this is what I'm trying to do, not just for Canarsie Pier Park, but for the parks all around Brooklyn.
Gotcha. And candidate Cornegie, give us your park and what you've done to make it better.
So Brian, that's difficult because in the city council, we've had laser-like focus on making sure our green spaces in Bed-Stuy and Crown Heights were upgraded and of the right standard. So we've spent literally $40 million over my 8 years in council just on green spaces. But my park would be Vaughn King Park. The reason is because that's the first park that I'm aware of in a Black community where Black men got together to start a conservancy. And the Vaughn King Conservancy started by 500 men making a difference. I was a part of those initial stages. So to watch my community and Black men in my community take the responsibility and lead the charge for public-private partnerships to be able to upgrade our parks is exciting. Watching that happen, I want to do that across the entire borough as the borough president. So it wasn't us waiting for someone else to make a change, even though we've spent maybe 8 or 9 million in Vaughn King Park. Those Black men said that's not enough, and we're going to start a conservancy like other conservancies around the borough, but led by Black men. So Vaughn King Park for me has held a special place in my heart because of the advocacy, not just from my office and myself, but for Black men to get together and begin a conservancy and start the relationship and get resources that are private resources into the conservancy to supplement what I was able to do from a city council perspective. So it has a special place in my heart. But we spent $40 billion over the last 8 years on upgrades.
Wow.
Okay, I see you there and I'm listening, and I'm going to start the next question with you. On the theme of this conservancy and the activity that's come from the community up in Vaughn King Park in Bed-Stuy, I have a question about land use. Now, we often see this idea that pits vitally needed affordable housing at odds with the creation of public spaces that are just as needed, as candidate Reynoso talked about before, in the way we have these urban environs without thought put to green space. So the question is, as borough president, how will you address the urgent need for both new affordable housing and new public open spaces?
Is that for me, Brian?
That's for you. We're going to start with you.
Right. So it's funny that you would ask that question, because I don't believe that it's mutually exclusive. And I've had this argument with everybody from DOP to HPD about this idea that they're competing ideas and themes. So what we've done in Bedford-Stuyvesant on new development, when we couldn't get it on the ground, we've actually had new development where there's green space on rooftops that are accessible to the community. So we've demanded all of our new development within the 36 council district include green spaces, not just for the residents of those buildings, but accessible to the community. And we had to fight it because it sounded like it was almost a poor door, like you had access to the roof through a different perspective. So we've created ways to get green space on almost every single new development in the district, because we believe that, yes, affordable housing is important, but equally as important is access to green spaces and healthy living. I grew up in an environment where my parents either sent me at the last day of school down south or to the Caribbean so I could put my hands in the soil and have that contact. Every single child in the borough of Brooklyn deserves that opportunity. And we were able to create it uniquely by having rooftop spaces and backyard spaces, but we demanded that on every development. As the borough president, I will expand that to the entire borough and demand affordability, but also access to green spaces on every new development in the borough. Whether it's on rooftops or backyards or whatever it has to be, we can get green spaces. We've demonstrated it. We see that it can happen if you're willing to be nuanced in the way that you build.
And to the best of your knowledge, how many of those developments have actually come to fruition that do it properly?
That's a good question. I don't have those numbers with me right now, but we've demanded it on every project, and it's been unique to each project. So some of them have been on the roof, some of them have been between buildings, some of them have been, but every one there was a demand. Nobody sat before me that needed the city subsidies. Right now, I can't talk about as of right building because I couldn't demand that.
I understand.
But every development in this district that requires city subsidy has green space included in it because we demanded that.
Okay. Demanded, and we'll wait to see how many actually answered that demand to
Absolutely.
an acceptable level.
Brian, I got a quick question, Brian. I just want to know how much time we have on this, because that was about 4
You're going to have 90 seconds on this, but I stepped in with the question. So if you provoke a question, you'll get a little more time.
Right.
As I'm looking at candidate O'Connor right now, I'm asking you the same question. As BP, how will you address that need for affordable housing as well as new public open spaces?
Well, once you're talking about housing, you're talking about my thing. I was the chair of housing for Community Board 17. Well, first of all, I heard what you said about the developers promising it and not, and whether they really give it.
Mhm.
So my transportation public service infrastructure advisory council is going to follow those developers. Developers can say whatever they want. What they actually do, and we see that countless of times where they come in the community and they said they're going to offer this, and it's not necessarily what they say they're going to do. So my advisory council, my staff director will be following the projects to, if they say they're going to put green space or open space, that they're actually going to continue the open space. The other thing I want to point out is that as the Brooklyn Borough president, I am going to be a champion for a greater budget for the Parks Department and for the organizations like New Yorkers Parks and Brooklyn Parks of Open Space. City Council has failed at how much money they have given to these parks, to the Parks Department. And we have seen it through COVID. Through COVID, people are inside. The parks were closed. Once the parks are open, they were not cleaned. Staff was cut. There was a hiring freeze. City Council is the one that agreed to less than 1%. And now, if you follow what the mayor is saying, the mayor is looking to move indoor DOE sports outdoor. So now you're putting more pressure on the Parks Department with not even a greater budget. They've decreased the budget. So I'm definitely going to stick with the refund, the park fund,
Yes.
and be a part of the coalition. And I want to hear more from the agencies, from the advocates, from the organizations, from, Commissioner Silver and Director of the Mayor's Office of Sustainability, and sit at the tables with them and hear what they need. My office is actually putting together, like I said, a master plan.
Okay, I'm sorry, you're at your time, but just to be clear, you think the answer lies in more funding, that would help to balance the idea of affordable housing and public spaces coexisting?
Well, open space, yes, but what I said before is that the developers need to be held accountable.
Accountability is where you come down.
Yes, my office is gonna work with these organizations to follow the developers' process and make sure that if they're offering green plant space and they're promising.
So much like candidate Cornegie, you would have this mandate that they bring that space, but you're adding a layer of accountability with the staff.
My office will actually do the accountability, follow the developers and what
with
they
the staff position.
With a staff position along
okay,
with
thank you. I think we're clear. I'm moving on to candidate Whitehead.
Thank you. So listen, we can sit here and give the correct political answers and we can all sound the same, right? But my first thing that I want to do, I want to target the elected officials that have been in bed with these developers, because let me tell you this, right? How are developers able to uphold what they do and to get around the community without the help of the council people and the assembly people that are in position? The same old faces, the same old thing, right? How can we talk about a green space, right, when we don't look at the NYCHA buildings and we can't help them with lead poisoning, right? What about their green space, right? What about developing some things over in Brownsville and East New York and the Black and brown communities where they don't even look to their parks to be clean. They don't even look to see flowers in their community, right? Who are the council and who are the assembly and who are the people that are the trusted voices that have been robbing the hood and acting like they're Robin Hood, right? So my office is going to be the voice for the voiceless, right? We're going to hold everybody accountable. We always push it on the developers. Now we know they're the culprits, but who are conspiring with the culprits, right? And we need to get an understanding that everybody's going to sound political. Everybody's going to say that they was a part of this building and that finance and this and that. What about someone that's new, right? Like myself, that I'm going to, whatever toes I got to step on, I'm going to make sure that the green space is available for the people and not lie to the people anymore. I have a budget that I can place into the parks. I have a budget that I can place for the green space. But at the end of the day, we have to build our community and stop lying to our community. And that's what my office is going to be. They're going to be able to trust and touch the borough president and not see him from afar and not lie to you. Like, this is going to be an office that is going to create an environment socially economically, green space, and mentally under my presidency.
So candidate Whitehead, just before we move on, as briefly as you can tell me, as borough president, when you say you're going to hold them accountable, how do you hold your fellow elected officials, colleagues in government accountable for what you would classify as being in bed with the developers?
The commission. I'm going to have commissioners that's going to be designed as watchdogs that are going to be over elected officials, over the NYPD, over the fire department.
Okay.
Yes.
I think I understand. Okay, candidate Reynoso, affordable housing and open spaces.
So right now, what the city of New York does and what the mayor does is that he ties park space and infrastructure projects and school buildings and all these valuable resources and infrastructure projects that are important to our communities to development. And what we need to do is separate the two. I have something called a comprehensive plan that moves us away from a ULURP, and ULURP is a uniform land use review process that is a developer-driven process. What we need to do is stop allowing for developers to come into our communities and dictate what it's going to look like, and in doing so, leverage park space, open space, school buildings, and all these other resources that we need. What I want to do is do the comprehensive plan and separate the capital budget of the city of New York from development. We need to be able to get these infrastructure improvements outside of development. These neighborhoods that don't see any development should be awarded the same opportunity to see new park space, to see new infrastructure, to see new schools happen. So my idea is to separate the city's capital budget from these rezonings and the development that happens in our city. And I just want to give a shout out to these interpreters that are doing an amazing job considering how fast we all speak.
They are, and I'm glad that you recognize them. But before we move on to what may very well be our last question, I want to ask something that came across the transom from the chat, and it's unfair, but just a yes or no as to whether this is something that you would consider as borough president. Someone in the chat said they have an idea for making parks improvement district that would require developers to help fund maintenance of nearby park spaces. Just by a show of hands, is that something that you as borough president would explore? Okay, moving on. So our last question that we're going to be able to get in here is about equity in the parks. You know, Community Board 17 in East Flatbush has the lowest percentage of actual parkland of all the community boards in the whole of the city. What would you do to ensure that more funding for parks and open spaces is directed into underserved, high-need communities in the borough in places like CB 17? Let's start with you, candidate Reynoso.
So the problem that we have now is an equity issue. The mayor and a lot of the elected officials spend most of their time talking and working for people that have a lot of political capital, folks that vote and folks that they think are going to be very important to them in their future. What we need to do is have a conversation about the folks that don't have the same civic engagement because they're worried about putting food on their tables and whether or not they're going to have a home to come to at the end of the day. It's an equity conversation. It's about who is going to spend more time in neighborhoods like East New York, Brownsville, and Coney Island, and allow for other people in more affluent districts to take a step back and allow us to rise all boats, and in doing so, improve the quality of life of the entire borough. So what I'm committing to here is that I'm going to be spending most of my time and resources ensuring that we're building more space and more access to green space, so actual green space in neighborhoods that have been deprived of that for a long time. I think that COVID has laid bare and very clearly to us that there's some have-nots that need a lot more resources. So again, I'm going to unapologetically and deliberately spend more time and resources in areas that need these type of resources.
So the borough president is staring down about $100 million in capital budgets. Candidate Whitehead, how are you going to use that money and your influence to make sure that equity is something that's a feature in all the parks in Brooklyn?
First, I'm just glad that Mayor Bill de Blasio is going out of office because I definitely want to work with the up and coming mayor. And once again, you know, we are plagued by a lot of elected officials that have not raised these issues while they were in office. Same voice, same tradition, same old thing. What I want to do is I want to make sure that we have environmental justice. Systemic racism that's against the parks and the environmental, it plagues all of our communities. It hurts the Black and brown community, the diabetes, the asthma, all the different things that we overlook to the communities that we don't care. There's someone that posted in the chat, he said that he went all the way to Ocean Parkway to clean up a park, but went back to a place where he lived where it was glass. The equitable interest from our politicians, we have been hurt and we have been bruised by equity share. So what I want to do is I want to make sure that I extend parks. I want them to be open a little longer. I want the children to be able to be more involved in the parks, walks in the parks. Growing up, that's what I used to do with my mother since my dad was gone. And I want you to understand that this is a new day. Right? It's a new way of life. It's either step up or step off. And we are now in front of a people of change. And we have to change the voices in order for things to change. There are too many people talking about change, but nothing is changing. Tradition has to go. Thank God that Bill de Blasio is gone, because he came in as Robin Hood and he came robbing the hood, just like all the other elected officials that's singing Kumbaya, but yet they're not doing nothing for our community. And
so your answer to equity is a sea change with the people who are sitting in the seats. But what you plan to do with that money is what exactly?
What I plan on doing with the money is making sure that I assess what the people need.
All right. Got that. Yeah. All right, candidate O'Connor, it's your moment.
So actually, community board, I'm from community board 17, but community board 12 and 14 have one less than us. So we're actually not, you know, we have 12, but they have 11. So I just want to
thank you for the fact check. Don't waste your time on how I got things wrong. How would you make sure you bring equity to those underserved places?
Because Community Board 17, one thing that I've done so far is assess the community and looked over the community to see how many parklands are there, right? And what I would do is break down every single community board, just like New York Parks has done for their open space profile, and work with the community boards individually to look at the open space and see what open space is available. I also want to add money to programs, right? My daughter, well, at age 4, was Golfer of the Week for African American Golfers Digest. We had to go to Dykers Hikes. We have to go to Marine Park. This is where we go every single summer for her to practice golf. We need golf in our communities. So I want to do a lot more programming. I do want to restaff the parks because they are understaffed, and bring back more staffing. Volunteers are great. You know, I want to have the Love Your Park ambassadors, but we can't take away from the fact that we still need that funding in the park. So that is a lot of what I'm going to do, work with the organizations that do this work. And I thank them for the work that they do, and make sure they're funded and they can keep on advocating for our parks. Thank you.
So to be clear, assess and fund is your pathway to that equity.
Absolutely.
All right, candidate Cornegie, you're going to be the last minute of this section of the debate.
Thank you. So what we need in the borough president's office is a three-legged stool between the land use, between the ability to leverage the $100 million in capital funding, and zoning. We can absolutely shape every corner of the district. It depends on what your priorities are. And for me, my priorities, as demonstrated by what we spent so far, are on underserved communities. Bedford-Stuyvesant was characteristically and has characteristically been an underserved community. We invested in light of that, in spite of that, 40 million into that. I got to be honest with you, a lot of the projects that we wanted exceeded my capital funding, and I had to partner with the borough president in order to get the bulk, or the rest of the money to be able to do that. So partnership and allocating that money and using the three-leg stool, which is finances and resources, the ability to use land use and zoning to create parks and green spaces throughout the borough is my key to success. That three-legged stool plus partnership with local electeds and a priority on underserved communities will get us to a place where there's equity in our parks and our green spaces throughout the borough.
So that is going to be the last word for this round of candidates. We thank you all for being here, and we'll see you at the polls in a few scant weeks. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.
Did a good job, Brian. Good job.
Oh, we're only halfway there, but thank you.
Oh yeah, there's still time. There's still time for you to mess it
Yeah,
all
good luck with that next panel. They're the worst.
up.
In the interest of bringing you all of the alternative voices that are in the race, we're going to say goodbye to this first half, and thank you for your interest and real thoughtfulness in answering these questions. So I'm going to invite our next round of panelists into the room now. So where segment 2 is coming up. If you just bear with us for a quick second, we'll be back with the candidates for Brooklyn Borough President. All right, so everyone is in the room. Thank you for continuing to stay with us. We hope you got something out of the first round of candidates. Now, I'm happy to welcome our next and final candidates for Brooklyn Borough President into the room now. And just as we did before, they're going to each have 30 seconds to introduce themselves to you. And she's first in the corner on my computer, so I'm going to start with candidate Kim Council.
Thank you so much. I just don't count this against my time, but I heard what Rob said. And when I see Rob, I'm coming for him. Anyway, I'm Reverend Kim Council, Associate Minister at Borough Baptist Church, nonprofit executive and law librarian and mom of 2. And really excited to be here tonight. I'm looking to level the playing field for all of Brooklyn. As your borough president, I plan to create a one-stop shop where we will help you to navigate all of the resources and the agencies that you will need as a member of the constituency of Brooklyn. We will also create a mobile borough hall that will bring the office of Borough Hall and its resources to each and every neighborhood of Brooklyn. Thank you so much.
Great, in 30. And I'm looking at candidate Simon right now. It's your turn.
Well, thank you, Brian, for moderating, and thank you to the Brooklyn Parks and Open Space Coalition for your commitment to a greener Brooklyn. I'm also a former teacher of deaf children and a sign language interpreter, so I want to thank all the interpreters and the captionists for their work today, keeping up with all of us. So, and many thanks, of course, to the Parks Department staff and all the volunteers that really have helped out and kept our parks clean, and really this past year has been a great challenge for all of us. So I want to thank all of you out there who are watching this forum today, because you care about our neighborhoods, our parks, and our open spaces and the future of Brooklyn. You know, I'm a longtime community activist, a disability civil rights attorney, and a progressive legislator, and a longtime advocate for parks and fighter for climate justice. And I'm running to be Brooklyn's first woman borough president, because it's time for a woman to lead the borough of Brooklyn. And I have substantial experience in community, legal, and legislative arenas. And I'm centering my campaign on the lives and opportunities of women and girls, because it's not just that when women are not part of political decision-making that the democracy is flawed, but that women improve democracy. And when women and children are in fact centered, then it improves everybody's lives, and it improves the lives of our men and our boys as well. My career has been about lifting up the voices.
That's your 30.
Thank you.
So we're going to move on to candidate Edwards right now, please.
Hi, good evening, everyone. Thank you for having me. My name is Carrie Edwards. I'm running for Brooklyn Borough President. I'm a lifelong Brooklynite, father of 3, and a husband. I am the only candidate in this race who has had borough-wide experience. I worked for 2 governors, as well as I handled health policy for the New York State Democratic Conference. I'm also the former vice president of Brookdale Hospital, One Brooklyn Health System in East New York. And really, I'm running to make sure of 3 things. I want to maintain the fact that people have a roof over their heads, that they're healthy, and that they're out of poverty. And that's why I'm running for borough president. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Candidate Fields, to you, your introduction.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for having me. My name is Pearline Fields, and I am running for Brooklyn Borough President because I want to make sure that marginalized communities get the resources that they require. I have experience in nonprofits mainly. I'm not a politician. I work with the United Nations, UNICEF, JDRF, Juvenile Diabetes Research Foundation, and I am the current board president for the Sierra House, an organization that assists at-risk youth and homeless mothers and their children. I'm a member of Community Board 17, where I am on the Land Use Committee and the Housing Committee chair, the current chair. And I am basically here to just discuss, the parks, because this is a new area for me. I'm learning as I'm sitting here tonight. So I hope to be able to have a great discussion with everyone. And thank you.
So just a little bit of housekeeping before we do move on. There were some questions about who responded in the affirmative to requiring developers to fund and maintain areas around them, a parks improvement district idea. And the folks who raised their hand, as I remember, were candidate Cornegie, Whitehead, and O'Connor. So moving on right now, I have a question for the folks who I'm lucky enough to be in the room with right now. As we sit here on Earth Day about resiliency, climate change continues to be a major threat. What will you do as borough president to provide leadership and ideas about bringing resources and how we can improve our climate resiliency? I'm going to start with you, Ms. Fields.
Well, I'm liking what I've been hearing from the new Green Deal that's been talked about. We need to be more active in assessing what's going on, making sure we use clean energy, making sure we use fair climate justice, where we're not, relying on putting the marginalized communities in the path of not getting the resources, or putting the jails and the things of that nature. We're the dumping ground for everyone. And I want to make sure that we follow the path of the plan that's been laid out in the new Green Deal. So this way we can, help with the clean energy, have the open space, the green space, more trees in the neighborhood. I grew up in the CB 17 area in Flatbush, where I know the only parks we had to play in was Prospect Park and Wingate Park. There wasn't a lot of parks for us. So I know we constantly gotten the short end of the stick. So I definitely think that's the way to go.
Okay, candidate Edwards, the same question to you about resiliency, and what ideas and leadership would you provide to make sure that our beautiful borough, which is blessed with all of this waterfront, be ready for what's happening with climate?
I mean, it takes an investment, but I'll pivot a little bit. First we need to talk about our transportation issues in our borough. In Brownsville, Eastern New York, while some communities have hybrid buses and electric buses, we're still using a lot of diesel buses going through many parts of our community. So what does that do? That changes the environment, exponentially. And in communities of color as well, we have high asthma rates because we do not want and able to support folks who need to put health first, right? And because of me being a health guy, I have to look at the reality of what's the importance of putting health first. So when we talk about resiliency, we really need to educate our community on how they could be more environmentally strong. So like I said, the first thing I like to do is look at our transportation. I also like to do about the recovery of, like you said, our waterfronts, Canarsie, Coney Island. We look at the erosion and we don't put the investment in that. And the borough president, like you said in the first time, has over $100 million in capital funding. That's the thing that I will do first, is to ensure that our waterways are invested in.
So transit and waterways as a conduit to making sure that we become more resilient.
Yes.
All right, candidate Simon, I'm looking at you for your ideas on resiliency. You are muted at the moment. So
I did that so that I wouldn't, I did that so I wouldn't be interrupting anybody. Number one, New York has passed the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act, which is essentially New York's Green New Deal. And I was proud to be a prime sponsor of that legislation. So we're working, of course, to pass money to help create the infrastructure to effectuate the CLCPA. But Brooklyn has 30 miles of shoreline and 2 navigable waterways that are Superfund sites. So this is a complex issue, and we really need to focus on resiliency in every way possible, including dealing with our transportation, for example, and electrifying our vehicles and putting in the infrastructure to electrify vehicles. We put some money in that. It's coming out of federal money as well. And that's because we need to decarbonize. Right now, vehicles are, in fact, the thing that is eating away at our ozone layer and causing the climate change that we have most. So it's very important that we work on transportation as well. But, you know, we can support every issue. The Billion Oyster Project will help revitalize, you know, our waterways.
Thank you.
And
I think that's your time.
Too many times. Okay, thank you.
Well, we need all the ideas we can, but we just don't have enough time to hear them all at once. Candidate counsel.
Yeah, I like what Assemblyman Simon was saying. I like what Mr. Edwards was saying. But I want to, you know, I grew up in Bed-Stuy on Gates between Sumner and Troop, which was literally a concrete jungle. We had no trees on my block. My mom fought to get trees planted outside of our buildings. You know, and during Hurricane Sandy, I belong to a group of women called Women of Faith Advocating Change. It's clergy and elected officials, and we came together and were boots on the ground when that neighborhood in Coney Island was devastated during Hurricane Sandy. So we see what the inequities are. As borough president, I will map, track, and publicize the data and see where there are geographic inequities, and then use the bully pulpit to make sure that the city and the state are putting resources there. And then whatever stopgap measures I can use as borough president, I will use with the money that we have for those things. But we also, you know, we have to make sure that we're looking at those things, because it's really criminal what has happened in our communities. When you look at communities like Jefferson Beach, when you look at Coney Island, you look at Rockaway. So there's things that we need to do with our infrastructure, and there's things that we can do, but we need the funding to make it happen.
Speaking of funding, we just heard Candidate Edwards just give a hint again at that capital budget power that the borough president has, along with a few other limited powers when it comes to land use. But staying on the funding tip, Candidate Edwards, I'm going to ask you, how would you use your discretionary capital and expense funds to benefit parks and open spaces?
Well, you know, the city council members get a park equity funding, which has been substantially cut over the years, to your point in the first session. You know, again, utilizing that support mechanism to now go and fund parks, fund living lots, fund green spaces, to now enact more of our community environmentally, to put them in a more environmentally strong position. The other thing I would also like to do is kind of talk to the DOE about, you know, green school curriculum. You know, I received a call from someone that asked me if I knew of any, you know, Black and brown students who like to go to HBCU colleges for free, you know, but they have to major in agriculture. And I couldn't really find any students. So we also have to use that to reinvest our infrastructure. So to also take that money to continue to build green spaces at schools, hydroponic farms, so that we start to understand going into the 21st century what our roles are, and utilizing that budget to do that. I'm looking forward to doing it.
Candidate Simon, that same question, how would you use your powers of budget and discretionary capital and expenses to further benefit parks and open spaces?
Well, a couple of ways, actually. One is, for example, supporting groups that are perhaps stewardship groups to take over some of the parks. And we have many parks and playgrounds, for example, that we haven't addressed their needs and done any kind of rehab for them. And I would really encourage groups to become stewardship groups. Red Hook Conservancy is one, the Friends of Thomas Green Park, which myself and a colleague started 12, 13 years ago, is another one. And having done that, I really know how I can help support others to do that. That will take some money as well. But also, you know, talking about curriculum, I think that's a great idea that Mr. Edwards had. You know, we started the garden train in my area. And one of the things I would say, PS 11 has a great hydroponics. I've been there. It's a wonderful program. I encourage anybody who can visit as soon as we can, obviously. So it's really funding projects big and small. You know, so much of the daily life of our parks and our use of parks is really families in small parks, something that's close to their home. It's like that 15-minute neighborhood, you know, making sure that we have trees, that we have plants, that we have the materials that people need to garden, to encourage kids to learn about gardening, and to take over some of those small spaces, for example, that can bring greenery to our neighborhoods. And trees, street trees are great. Adding trees to our neighborhoods is extraordinarily important, and it's also environmentally important.
Okay, Candidate Counsel.
Again, I think, working with community-based organizations that are already doing the work, trying to help them to get the funding that they need to continue the work. There's a lot of good organizations out in East New York that work with young people that have farms and green spaces, and those community gardens, but also making sure that the Parks Department is fully funded. So again, it's figuring out where the stop measures are and then working to bring people together within the city council and within the state to make sure that the budget is increased, and then using whatever resources we have at Borough Hall to fill the stopgap measures.
So Candidate Fields, $100 million sounds like a lot of money till people start showing up with their projects. How are you going to make sure that parks and open spaces get their fair share of that money? Unmute for me. Candidate Fields, you're on mute right now. There you go. And you did it again. Hold on, your fingers got a little happy there. Click unmute for me one more time. And you're still gonna get a minute, so get in there.
Yeah, okay. I think by partnering with some organizations like the Doe Fund, where you can have a combination of tending to the parks and providing jobs at the same time, we can make sure that recently, people who let out of prison can tend to the parks and help to build more green spaces within the area and encourage more community gardens, and they can tend to it. So kind of have a co-relationship to make sure that we're getting in space and we're using the funds to not only make sure we have greener space and take advantage of the open space that we have, but also provide jobs at the same time to people who have trouble finding employment because of discrimination against people who've been recently incarcerated. So we make sure like the people like who the Doe Fund, they provide jobs for prisoners who were recently out of prison. They can tend to the parks and make sure that we I can't even think right. Make sure that we get the organizations out there to help the school and things of that nature.
Okay, so I'm just gonna slow it down for a second. We'll lower the temperature and just ask one of the yes or no questions. By a show of hands, I'll ask you to respond to the question of, would you commit to supporting a goal of 1% of the city's budget, which is not the allocation right now, to be clear, but would you consent to supporting the goal of 1% of New York City's budget being dedicated specifically for parks? So if that's a commitment that you would make right now, could you show your hand?
Yep.
I'm looking at candidate Edwards. Simon, I saw your hand. Council, I see you, and Fields. So we're all in agreement here that 1% of the city's budget should be developed, or excuse me, dedicated specifically to that purpose. So this is more of a long answer question. Again, I want to speak with you all right now about the climate resiliency we've gone through, but leadership. So as the leader of the best borough in the world, all things considered, so as Brooklyn Borough President, you would be charged with being both an advocate and an ambassador for the borough and its residents. So what approach would you bring to bring attention to the importance of the park spaces? And I'm saying this with full knowledge that it's Earth Day and so many of us have been volunteering, and frankly, the parks couldn't manage without all of the people who are so dedicated, many in this room who volunteer, but knowing that we're only hours away from a horrible wave of vandalism that hit Prospect Park and saw all these overturned trash cans that just made a mockery out of the work that volunteers do. So holding both of those things in our mind, knowing how dedicated some people are and how one act of senseless vandalism can undo so much work, I wonder how you as a leader plan to keep the vitality and infrastructure of Brooklyn parks at the front of your administration and in the minds of Brooklynites. I'm going to start with you, Candidate Edwards.
The platform of the office gives us the ability to speak volumes throughout the borough. We are the leader of the borough in that respect. But I would like to also pivot a little bit to talk about, how horrible we had to deal with COVID-19, and how when we look at who was at the forefront, who are our frontline workers, the DC 37 members of 1505, the park workers, right? And so I applaud the volunteers as well, but so many of those park workers, the people that had dedicated their lives to city government, lost their lives doing their job. And I think that the way you create leadership is to empower those who also do the work. So I love the fact that we have volunteers, but I also really would like to put those folks back in the forefront and realize that, you know, one parks workers cannot help clean up a messy park. And we sometimes take that process away from our community. And so I would really like to also, by my leadership, empower those who have done the work, who have dedicated their lives to that work. And using, again, the platform, I don't like the bully pulpit, but using the platform of bringing communities together to bring that nuance back, you know, because again, it's green spaces, there's concrete jungles, but in the end of the day, we have to admire and respect those who do this job every day, and sometimes thankless, and sometimes make less than $15 an hour.
Candidate Simon, how would you use your leadership and that platform to make sure that immediate attention is paid to the vitality and the essential service that parks provide?
Well, number one, I think that I agree completely that we need to be supportive of our park staff, and we need to, in fact, increase the staffing for our parks, because that makes a big difference to making sure that our parks are adequately cared for, and it provides good quality jobs and green jobs for our Brooklyn workers. But the other thing is that, you know, you have to be present, right? And one of the things I have been is very accessible and very present in my community work as well as my legislative work, and center this around children and families. Parks are a great place. You know, you have a baby, you get a baby carriage, you're out in the park, right? It is the place that we can bring families together and empower families, give them things to do, give them events, give them ways of developing their connection to the earth, and to nurturing and to growing plants. There are lots of ways that we can work with families. And when you connect families with parks and with, you know, with resiliency and with nature, with, you know, adopting a bioswale on your block, well, those are all important things that help empower communities and tell children that they can have power in their lives as well. So it's not just about being empowered myself. It is about, in fact, empowering others. And that's what the borough president can really do in a unique way, because it is really the role of the borough president to do that.
Candidate Fields, awareness for the parks.
Yes, I intend to be the biggest cheerleader for Brooklyn since Marty Marquez. I intend to make sure that everyone knows Brooklyn is here, the parks are available, you know, they're great to attend. I want to make sure that everyone knows that when we need resources, that's where it needs to go. I want to make sure that it'll be like when Ed Koch was, how am I doing? How are the parks doing? Come on down, check us out. I want to make sure programs are available for everyone to attend, and that the parks are good for everyone, you know, regardless of what you are, or what you're doing, whether you have a family or you don't have a family, because everyone should have access to them.
All right, Candidate Counsel, your role as an awareness maker.
Well, I mean, you know, I think as a minister, as a preacher, as someone who, you know, is very comfortable making a whole bunch of noise about certain things, that wouldn't be too much of a challenge for me to bring awareness to an issue that I think is important. I think one of the things that Mr. Edwards started out with, you know, talking about how essential the people are who clean our parks and making $15 an hour. I think, you know, we need to fight to increase their salaries. We need to be doing things to make sure that they're being compensated in a way that is fair and equitable. But to bring attention and awareness, we're going to use all the tools in the toolbox. We're going to use social media. We're going to, you know, have a marketing campaign. We're going to put money aside to do that. We're going to, you know, work on educating our kids in the classroom. So we're going to use whatever tools we have in the toolbox to make sure that people know and appreciate that these spaces exist, and that these spaces can get the resources that they need in order to continue to do what needs to be, to give us the services that we appreciate.
So for everyone in the room, will you include, yes or no question again, will you include young people with disabilities in general awareness campaigns, talking about that platform right now, about parks and their maintenance, so that young people with disabilities and all of those New Yorkers with disabilities, as we saw, we leaned on them so much during this pandemic, will have access and can utilize the parks? Yes, with a show of hands.
Yes, yes.
All right, just for the record, everyone hand is up in the affirmative. So next, would you agree to advocating for funding for adaptive sports for young people with disabilities that are housed in our parks?
Yes.
Hands up for yes.
Mhm.
Okay, and then there's one more yes or no question that was submitted. Would you support the creation of a director of public realm to set citywide parks and open space agenda and ensure the collaboration across agencies?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay,
Within our power of the office, of course.
within the power of the office. So looking at that, knowing that we only have about 3 minutes left, I'm going to do the most unfair thing in the room and ask you now, as borough president, knowing the limitations of that power, do you have a vision for Brooklyn parks, or is it enough to have a budget to have experts make that vision, who are the folks who put together this forum and are working on it every day? So is the power in your individual vision, or is it in your ability to support with funding, bringing that vision of folks to fruition?
Who's first?
Starting with, who you gonna start with?
You're speaking, Mr. Edwards, take that question, and
He
it's
went first like 3 times.
30 seconds, you're second. He started first.
So I definitely have the passion, but I won't lie and say I have the expertise. And that's why having a screening like this, having the experts in the room can help me shape not only legislation, but agendas to use my money wisely. So I definitely have the passion for parks, because I said, as a young Black man growing up in Brooklyn, that's all we had. You know, we don't have backyards, we don't have rooftops. What we have are parks and green spaces. And so for me, I definitely love my parks, but I'm not an expert on that. I'm a healthcare guy, but I'm not a parks guy. So I would really like to have you guys in the room to help me shape my agenda.
Candidate counsel, do you have a vision for Brooklyn parks, or do you have the money to make the vision happen?
It's both, and we've got to get everybody at the table. You know, as much as we know that there's so much more that we don't know, and we're going to have blind spots. So we're going to put the money to the side, you know, to make sure that we're funding them in an equitable way and making sure that there's green spaces in my hood and, you know, in the places where they need to be. But we need the people who are on the ground, boots on the ground, community-based organizations that have been grinding and doing the work at the table and having a voice in how money is being spent, and helping us to see where our blind spots are.
Fully funded. That's your coalition. All right, candidate Simon, your vision for the parks, or you're going to fund the people who've been in the fight the longest?
I'm going to do both. First of all, I think it's a little arrogant to have just my vision for parks, right? Because I believe in participatory design, and that is empowering, and it does draw on the expertise of those people who know more about parks, who know more about policy, who know about developing parks, and can put those dollars to use in the most effective way. But it's about having them work with community so that the vision is our vision.
So last word on this, candidate Fields, who's on your squad? Who are you bringing to make sure these visions come to fruition?
Anybody who's out there doing the work, because it's going to take all of us working together to get the work done. So I want to make sure the organizations are involved. I want to make sure community members who need the parks, and make sure they have the voice as to what's needed, and any elected officials who wants to get down with it too, because it's going to take all of us working together.
So that is going to be the last word. I had so many more questions for you all. This is also unfair. I want to know about your commitment to community boards and making sure people who care
because you get them more time, brother.
Yeah, man. They have way more time than we have.
Oh, now the complaints department is open. I just want to say thank you all for coming. We really appreciate the thoughtfulness that you put into this. We'll see you on the campaign trail, and we'll also see you at the polls. We really appreciate your being here and your thoughtful ideas.
Thank you, Brian.
Appreciate it. And I apologize. I'm apologizing to the interpreter. I'm so sorry. I know I was talking too fast. I'm sorry.
Yeah, that's facts. You're absolutely correct. I apologize as well.
Have a great night, and we will meet you on the website. Please check in. We've got extra things and questions that the candidates filled out beforehand to give you a more full view of their positions and what they would do as Brooklyn's next borough president. But until we see you at the polls, everyone enjoy your parks. Happy Earth Day. Good night.
Bye.